Good, yeah, so welcome back to the main shrine here, and welcome back if you're joining us online as well. So my name's Danayutta, and just for those of you who are in the shrine room, we gave this talk a title, which was Who Are the Spiritually Mature? Yeah, so who are the spiritually mature? And I don't know, hopefully this is not too cheap, but I thought maybe I'd start off with a bit of audience participation and just and ask all of you, what do you think are the qualities of a spiritually mature person? Yeah? And how might that be different from simply a mature person? Yeah? What do you think are the qualities of a spiritually mature person? And how might that be different from just sort of like plain maturity? Oh yeah, go on.
Somebody who has achieved some sort of experience and who tends to speak less.
Okay, so somebody who speaks less.
Speaks less about spirituality
Okay.
than the less mature person, but there is a presence there.
Yeah, so they have an experience, they have a presence, but they might not speak in maybe pseudo-spiritual language, something like that, or might speak less. What do you mean by speaking less?
What do I mean by speaking less? There's just so much talk about spirituality. It's unbelievable. Everybody talks about it. Everybody who's a bit alternative, long-minded talks about it, but they're almost talking a way to convince you or themselves. So there's no need for the person who had the experience to convince.
Okay. So somebody who has the experience doesn't necessarily need to like fill the space with lots and lots of words about what spirituality is.
In a way.
Cool. Good. Anyone else? Go on.
I've always thought that patience was something I've seen in someone who's mature or spiritually mature.
Yeah, so patience. Yeah, good. Yeah, I can really imagine that. Yeah?
Resilience and an ability to endure hardship when needed.
Yeah, so resilience and an ability to endure hardship. Yeah.
Openness and accepting.
Yeah.
Often people that are close-minded are not very kind of spiritually in tune, but individuals who have kind of reached certain enlightenment are probably more open, accepting to all sorts of different things and experiences and people.
Yeah. So somebody who's open, who's more accepting, particularly of a range of people. Yeah. Go on.
Clarity, like an ability to see clearly and respond to what's actually happening, less shrouded by thoughts and distraction.
Yeah.
And how it's different from the spiritually immature. Maybe it's not so different in terms of experience, but it's different in terms of frequency. So maybe the spiritually mature person is able to do that more and more and expand those qualities out more and more.
Yeah. It's an ability to be clear and to see things clearly. Yeah. I often think of wisdom as having a broad perspective and a wise perspective. Yeah. Come on, JC.
For me, I think it would be somebody who practices virtues, virtues that they really believe in, but practice it on a daily basis, regardless of what the circumstances.
Yeah. So a virtuous person who actually is virtuous, not just talks about it. It's the same in different situations. Yeah, good. All right. So it's quite good to just sort of think about our sort of initial responses, isn't it? In Bante's translation of the Dhammapada, so Bante Sangharakshita translated the Dhammapada, he translated chapter 6 as the spiritually mature. And because I'm sort of interested in these things, I actually looked up the Pali, and I wanted to know what was the word that he translated as the spiritually mature. And the word is pandita. Yeah, pandita. So pandit, some of you might have come across that word before. That is the word that's being translated. So just to say that the structure of the Dhammapada is, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but they're these short little verses, and these verses are like little thunderclaps of teaching, and they're grouped in themes, so it's like thematically grouped. So last week Suragupta was talking about flowers. This week we're talking about those people who are spiritually mature. And you may or may not know this. I only found this out in the last few years, that actually each verse is kind of like a condensation of a particular teaching. And that's quite important, because what it means is that they were said to specific people in specific situations. So basically, every single verse has a story behind it. Yeah, you can look it up in the Dhammapada Atthakatha, the commentary to the Dhammapada. You can look up, like verse 85. What's the backstory to this particular teaching? Verse X, Y, Z. What's that particular story behind the teaching? And I find it fascinating because I just really like stories about the Buddha, and I really like stories about the early Sangha. Because for me, these stories are very, very confidence-giving. You just sort of realize that the human situation and all the things that we do is pretty much the same. The Buddhist disciples did all sorts of silly things that we would recognize in ourselves and in our friends. Yeah. So I thought what we could just explore is one particular verse from the Pandita Vaga, from this chapter of the Panditas, the chapter of the spiritually mature. And the verse that I wanted to explore was this one, which is, do not associate with evil friends, do not associate with low fellows, associate with spiritual friends, associate with superior people. Yeah? Shall I tell you the story behind it? Okay, so it's got a great story, and you might recognize some of the characters in it. So when the Buddha, before his enlightenment, and he was a prince in his princely palace, he made, he had these series of realizations that made him want to leave his home life and go forth as a spiritual wanderer. And in the legend, what happened was that he was a prince, and so he had an attendant. In particular, he had one attendant who drove his chariot. As a charioteer, or maybe you can think of that as somebody who looked after his horse. Yeah, and this man was called Chanda. And the night that the Buddha left home, the night that the Buddha went forth, Chanda went with him, and they saddled out his horse, Kantaka, and then they sort of crept out of the palace. In the sort of more flowery legends, they talk about how the gods and goddesses lifted up Kantaka's hooves so that he didn't sort of like clip-clop and sort of wake up all the palace households, and these big iron gates just opened and Kantaka went softly away. Chana and Kantaka accompanied the Buddha all the way to the boundary of the Buddha's father's land. By the way, I'm telling you the story from the Dictionary of Pali Proper Names. If you ever wanted like a hitchhiker's guide to the Pali canon, this is the Dictionary of Pali Proper Names. It's basically a dictionary of every single sort of person or sutta or place that appears in the Pali Canon. It's great. I really love it. Yeah, so they went as far as the river Anoma, and there the Buddha gave his ornaments to Channa and bade him to take Kantaka, the horse, back to the palace. However, it says here, however, Kantaka died of the broken heart. Yeah, so the horse died after the Buddha left him. And Channa's grief was great because he suffered a double loss. He suffered the loss of the Buddha's friendship, and he also suffered the loss of the horse. He really, really wanted to go forth alongside the Buddha, but the Buddha said, no, I have to do this journey alone. Go back to my father. After the Buddha's enlightenment, he did, wander around teaching and eventually wandered back to his home. And there, Channa went forth under the Buddha's dispensation, went forth as a monk in the Buddhist spiritual community, along with many, many other people. However, Channa was quite a prideful person. He had this sort of pride that's due to association. He was like, oh yeah, I was there first, I was the Buddhist. I was there the night that the Buddha left the palace. He had this egotistical pride that prevented him from fulfilling his duties as a monk, or even really practicing the Dharma properly. So he was full of pride, and one of the forms that his pride took was that he had taken a particular dislike to two of the Buddha's main disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana. He would say, well, I came along with the Buddha when he left his palace, and Sariputta and Moggallana have only recently come along, yet they call themselves chief disciples, And, this is what Channa used to say, and they are strutting around the place. So eventually, it sounds like things got around in the Sangha. The monks and the nuns gossiped and, eventually somebody told the Buddha that this was what was happening. And the Buddha said, call Channa to me. Yeah, so he called Channa to himself, and he told Channa, look, these guys are very, very learned. Sariputta and Moggallana are very, very learned. You do need to change your behavior. Stop taunting them. You need to change your behavior and befriend them. So Channa kept silent. He was scolded by the Buddha, and he kept silent, and then he left. But the behavior still continued. So the Buddha called him again. He said, Channa, look, you need to befriend them. They are your spiritual friends. You need to be a little bit more open to them. Channa kept quiet, but still he didn't change his behavior. So the third time the Buddha called him, scolded him again. Still nothing happened. And finally the Buddha said to Channa, these two noble bhikkhus are your good friends, and you should associate with them and be on good terms with them. And then he said this verse, do not associate with evil friends. Do not associate with low fellows. Associate with spiritual friends. Associate with superior people. Now it's quite interesting that this particular verse is recorded, because Channa still didn't change his behavior. He really, really was quite stubborn. Yeah, so the Buddha's given him this really direct teaching 3 times, and nothing happens. Okay. So this goes on for many years. So this happened over many years. The Buddha, it was said that the Buddha sort of taught for about 40 years. So you imagine this is happening over about 40 years. And then finally, on his deathbed, the Buddha gives his attendant Ananda 2 instructions. One is that the minor rules can be abolished. So that was one instruction. And then the second instruction was about jhana. And by the way, with jhana, so this is the Buddha on his deathbed, with jhana, you have to impose the Brahma Danda punishment. Yeah? And the Brahma Danda punishment is where the whole Sangha does not speak to you. Yeah? Everyone ignores you. Well, basically, you're kind of like cast out, from the Sangha. So it's very, very serious. And then the Buddha dies. So jhana is cast out of the Sangha. And the bhikkhus ignore him and have nothing to do with him. And then there is recorded in a different part of the Pali Canon, the Chana Sutta, where this is after the Buddha's death. Chana is going from cell to cell, asking for teaching, asking to be taught. So something's happened for him. He's definitely changed. He wants to change, and he wants to be taught. So some receptivity has arisen in him. But no one talks to him. Yeah, no one teaches him. Except for the Buddha's companion, Ananda. Ananda, if you read the suttas, he comes across as a very, very kind person. And he's got a particular sort of soft spot for the underdog, or the people who are sort of like on the edges of society. He's very, very kind to nuns, for example, very kind to the ill. So finally, Chana comes across Ananda's cell and asks him for a teaching. So Ananda praises Chana for his newfound receptivity and teaches him about conditioned arising. Chana goes away, practices his teaching, and eventually becomes an enlightened being. So it does have a happy ending eventually. So, I really, really like the story, and I just find it very curious that they recorded this particular little aphorism, even though it didn't have its intended effect. Yeah. So the Buddha was trying to teach Chana, and at that time, it didn't have its intended effect. Yet the compilers of the suttas found it important enough and a sort of effective enough teaching to be included in the canon. Yeah, so when I was thinking about this thing, what would spiritual maturity look like? I found it a little bit like what Satchidasa was saying in the first half, easier to think about what it's not, actually. And not so much in terms of spiritual immaturity, but more like what would be the near enemies of spiritual maturity. I don't know if you guys know the YouTube star J.P. Sears. He's like, gosh, I'm just really nodding. Maybe you and I watch the same sort of YouTube clips. But J.P. Sears, he does these videos on how to be gluten-free, how to be a really spiritual person, how to be a yogi, and they're hilarious. It's sort of they're satires on what a really spiritual person is. And it's quite good, actually. I think particularly if you think of yourself as a spiritual person, it's quite good to just watch them because it's quite funny and you might actually recognize yourself in them. So I was thinking that being a spiritually mature person isn't about being beige or boring or bland or agreeable. Yeah. I think sometimes what what can happen, maybe even a bit unconsciously, is that we think of spiritual growth as, cutting off all the fun bits of ourselves and just being really good, being really what's the word I'm looking for? It's not insulting. It's inoffensive. Yeah, being really inoffensive, and it's not like that at all. When I think of my teachers, people who I look up to, most of them, actually all of them, are very, very joyful people. They're very, very joyful people. And they're sort of very free. They laugh a lot. They're happy. Their life looks rich. Yeah. And many of them participate or are masters in the great Buddhist art of teasing. Yeah, they're very, very good at teasing, both as a form of, just having fun, but also as a form of helping people grow. Teasing as a way of like giving a little bit of feedback. Yeah. I just remember the first time I came across this art of teasing. I was on a retreat, and I was on the team for the retreat, and I was quite new to being on teams, and slightly scared of the order members, and feeling like I needed to be really, really good. And one day, the chair of the center on that retreat asked if I would like a cup of tea. And I said yes. And I thought, okay, like the simplest thing to ask for is just like whatever Maitrabandhu's having. So I was just like, oh yeah, I'll just have whatever Maitrabandhu's having. And then he said, would you like a biscuit with that? And I just somehow just thought, no, no, I just don't want to be demanding, And then he said to me something like, what are you going to go forth from? Just have a biscuit, Yeah. So, the other thing I thought about was that sometimes we can think that if we're spiritually mature or on our way to being spiritually mature, we don't make mistakes, and we're always nice to people. Yeah. So does that sound familiar? Kind of think like I can't make a mistake, and you always have to be nice. And I don't think it's like that at all. I think you actually come into deeper communication with people, and sometimes that can be tricky or difficult or uncomfortable. A few months after I was ordained, I was sat here teaching, and there was another order member in the room. And I don't know quite what happened that night, but I thought the class went well, and he really, really didn't. So like, as soon as I stepped out the door, he said to me, I have to say something to you. And then just told me how badly the class went. In his opinion, and that was so painful. It was like devastating. I had just been ordained, and people were still walking through the room, like leaving the center, and I felt really, really difficult. I was really upset. And then a few days later, I found it painful. I was quite upset, and a few days later, he asked me if I would have lunch with him, and I did. I did want to get back into more communication. And over that lunch, he apologized, and it felt like a masterclass in how to apologize well. And that apology felt like a spiritual teaching. Yeah. I just find that really interesting. This was somebody who's been in the order for over 20 years, has been around practicing as a Buddhist for decades. And I felt like that whole thing was a gift. I felt like I had really, really been taught and really been brought on. Somebody was taking me seriously enough to say what he thought, and then, again, say what he thought. Yeah. He apologized, by the way, for the way he had told me. But also he apologized for not being particularly open to me as well, which I found quite interesting. So, I just want to come back to this particular verse and ask you, maybe if you can get into 2s or 3s, and if you're online, you could put your responses in the chats. You can say to each other whether you have friends or situations with other people that you find yourself in that lead you to naturally being a bit unskillful. So, that would be the evil friends and low fellows bit. And also say if you have situations where you feel like in those situations you are with people who raise your consciousness, you are with people who are superior, and as a result, you too are the best, show your best sides. Yeah. So maybe get into 2s or 3s. This one? Yeah. Okay. Good. So, was there anything in that surprised you, or you thought was interesting, worth sharing? No, it was really banal. Go on.
We had difficulties coming up with examples of people in our current life that we associate with that we would pick out to criticize, possibly due to not wanting to offend, or possibly due to their really not being such a presence in our lives anymore. But yeah, it was a little bit more difficult compared to the opposite of spiritual friends.
Yeah. So you feel that there aren't like I guess like it's quite stark there, isn't it? Like evil friends or low fellows. Okay, yeah. Compared to that's good, isn't it? It's good, isn't it? It's good that you're mainly, it sounds like, in growthful situations. Okay. Yeah, Milka?
Yeah, ours was a bit similar. I mean, like, there's a certain friend I meet, and he's not evil or anything, but just I'm gonna go down the wrong way, like, he's gonna take me to a club, I'm gonna end up drinking and go down a different way. Like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with drinking and a social drink, but with this particular friend, that's what he wants to do in his spare time. And I've got a different friend, who likes reading books, not about Buddhism, but like different books. So I'll rather stick to the friend with the books. And and the one who drinks, I'll rather stay friends with him, but like, to a certain extent. Yeah. Well, it's easy to get drawn in. Sorry? It's easy to get drawn in. Yeah, that's it. Like, I mean, I see the guy sometimes, about twice a month, but I just try to keep, like, just say hello and how you doing, and that's it, really. But he's not evil. Yeah, no, he's not evil. It's probably more just that, like, their company can sometimes lead us to, undesirable states, or just slightly being less mindful. And not only that, there's other people I'd rather meet. Might think to myself, no, I'm not going to go there because he's going to take me away from my teachings. From the Dharma, so Yeah.
Good. Yeah? Sorry, I thought you had your hand up.
Oh, I mean, I was going to say, like, just noticing that it's not necessarily that, like, the friends themselves are equal, but the situation that they're in causes me to sort of, as if I'm going down that other path that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's much more of a test if you hang out with the wrong people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're going to, and being a test, it'll help you grow.
Yeah. Well, if you, I suppose it asks you to be more of an individual, to stand on your own feet, to stand on your own ethical practice, to stand on your own mindfulness. I guess the thing is that for most of us, a bit like what you're saying, is not that they're necessarily evil, although some people possibly are. It's just that for most of us, it will be quite difficult to rise above our context. We sort of, humans, the sort of animal part of us tends to conform. We tend to conform to the group. We tend to conform to the people around us. It takes quite a lot of effort, mindfulness, practice to be an individual, to stand on your own 2 feet. I had been practicing for quite a long time, quite a few years, and I found myself taking a 1-year contract in a large corporate. And it was quite a sweary place. And I just noticed that even though I was living in a Buddhist community at that time, because I was just spending 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. around people who swore a lot, I just swore a lot. It's quite funny. And then the moment I stopped working there, I just stopped swearing. Yeah. Just sort of quite small things like that. Okay. So I'm just jumping around a little bit. I wanted to tell you another little story that might shed a bit of light on the spiritually mature. So I'm moving away from the Dhammapada. This is a story, it's quite well known, about a particular nun. And her name was Mahapajapati. So this is the Buddha's stepmother. And after the Buddha's awakening, Mahapajapati did go forth and become a nun under his in his community. Not just that, she was also an elder and also a teacher in her own right. But this conversation takes place a little bit earlier in her spiritual career, before she becomes a great leader in the nun sangha. So what happens is the Buddha is staying near Vaishali in the peaked roof hall, and Mahapajapati comes to the Buddha and she bows to him, and she says to him, I want to dwell alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, resolute. I think that basically translates to, I'm going on a long solitary retreat. Will you teach me the Dharma, in brief, so that I will know what is the Dharma and what is not? Yeah? So I will know what is the Dharma and what is not. So the Buddha tells her 8 things, which I think actually help us shed light on what are the qualities of a spiritually mature person, or at least how to get there. Well, both the qualities and how to get there. So he says that the teachings that are the Dharma are those that lead to dispassion and not to passion, to being unfettered, not to being fettered. You can translate that into plainer English by just using the word free. So to being free, not to being not free. To shedding, or sometimes that's translated as renunciation, not to accumulating. to modesty, not to self-aggrandizement, to contentment, not to discontent, to seclusion, not to entanglement, to aroused persistence, not to laziness, to being easy to support, not being difficult to support. So, in a way, these are sort of 16 qualities, really, 8 things that are sort of positive, and 8 things that are somewhat negative in the sense that they sort of lead you astray. I think sometimes when you look at a list like this in a Pali text, it's better not to try to take the whole list in. It can just be a bit too much. What I tend to do with a list like this is just to pick out the 2 or 3 things that I think, oh yeah, that is quite interesting. So what I've been interested in is this thing of being unfettered, not to being fettered. So this one. I've spent just a week on retreat recently, and it's a very, very precious retreat for me because it was only a week, and it was completely for myself in the sense that I was a retreatant, not on the team or leading the retreat. And my next retreat is in October, which is quite a long way away, but that's just sort of how it is. And the retreat was so precious to me that I was very, very determined to make the most of it. And the way I did that was by doing absolutely nothing in the spaces where there wasn't anything to do. And because I was at this beautiful vicarage in Sussex, there was nothing to do. And the times when I had nothing to do, I just lay on the lawn and looked at the blue sky. And this word fettered, or being unfettered for me, always speaks of the blue sky, because in the blue sky you can travel in any direction. Yeah, you're not limited, and you can travel in any direction. You're just completely free, and you don't have to be any size. This probably makes more sense if you're looking at birds. Do you know, when birds, it's really, really hard to tell the size of a bird. Yeah. The other one that I've been interested in is this one, to contentment, not to discontent. So a spiritually mature person is contented and not discontented. And I really feel that that's true. What I like about hanging out with order members who either have just come off retreat or have been practicing for ages is that they're just really, really easy company. And I think that comes from being deeply, deeply contented in themselves. They're not wanting for things. They're not sort of slightly thinking about something else whilst they're talking to you. They're just completely present, and they're present because they're really contented. And then the last thing, the third one that I'm really interested in is this thing of being easy to support and not being difficult to support. In other translations, it says, what was it, Becky? Do you remember what it was? Oh, it was to being burdensome. Yeah. So it's to being burdensome and not to being to being unburdensome and not to being burdensome. But I think I slightly prefer the translation of being easy to support. Partly, I think, Akasha Mitra was talking a couple of weeks ago about one of the main preoccupations in the early Sangha was what food are you going to get That was like the main sort of distraction. If your main job for the day is going to beg for some food, that would be quite preoccupying. But I was thinking, in terms of being easy to support, you could also sort of think about not just whether your wants and needs are few, but also whether or not it's easy to help you. Are you easy to help, or are you really difficult to help? One of the books next to my bed at the moment is Eric Burns' Games People Play. And then in there, he says that one of the most long analyzed games is the yes but game, where somebody goes like, oh, I have got a problem, and then he's trying to say something. Oh, and what about this? And they go like, yes, but, it's basically the hole in the bucket. There's a hole in the bucket. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone has got any responses to this particular list or any questions in relation to it. Go on, Brian.
Well, these kind of things are the results of Dharma and practice, all these things, aren't they? You can't really think, oh, I'm going to be easy. I suppose you could use some of those things as pointers for consequences. Are the consequences of my acting thus?
Well,
I'm a burden to myself and other people. So what am I, as a pointer for what my actions are causing this movement?
Yeah.
But in general, this seems to be something you just kind of maybe forget about, but look to for signs that you're going on the right path or off it. Do you think?
I think this is one of those teachings where it's both the path and the fruit. Yeah. So you can practice contentment, and contentment is also the fruit of practice. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, you can practice renunciation, or at least practice not accumulating, and also things just sort of fall away because they're really not such big a deal. Yeah, so I think it's a path and a fruit. Yeah, but it's a good question. It's worth thinking about.
It's kind of difficult to practice. Maybe, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, you could practice contentment. You could say, okay, how can I be more content with this? Or it requires some other skills, doesn't it? Like the word contentment maybe means, okay, I'm very content the past in the mindfulness of breathing that's above, now I'll just do that. Or it requires some analysis. It requires some other things to bring you to. It's very difficult to say, I'm just going to practice contentment and be content. If you're not, you need to kind of bring other things in, don't you? Or maybe that's just me.
I don't know. Maybe it might be something that you could just explore. Like how would you bring more contentment into your life? Yeah. Go on, Sajidasa.
I was just thinking, when my honest response to that was, when you said this near enemy of sort of being sort of inoffensive, and some of those qualities, on first looking at them, started to look like being a bit quiet and a bit, just don't make a fuss about things, get secluded and shed stuff, and sort of slightly unattractive. But when you started to talk about it and started to unpack just a few of them, I started to see the more beautiful, joyful life that is indicated by them. But it's not always easy for me to first see them in these lists. They seem a bit lacking in that.
Yeah, it can seem a bit lacking in joy or something. Yeah. I do think with Pali lists, you need to approach it with your retreat head. Imagine it at the end of a really, really good men's intensive or a really good women's intensive. You're everything is amazing. I'm gonna be so content forever. Until you get to the service station. This is true. I think that is why it's worth. That's why I really wanted to bring in the kind of near enemies. It's not about being beige or bland.
I think related to that is the top one,
Yeah.
Which, on the face of it, is something I don't agree with.
Yeah, yeah.
Like passion being strong emotions.
Yeah.
Either for or against something, I think is something we should cultivate.
Yeah, yeah,
it's the way
yeah.
you're actually going to commit to something.
Yeah.
This passion seems a little bit
wet.
Wet.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit bland.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
spineless.
yeah. Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
passion can be a solid virtue.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that you're not trying to get rid of discriminating wisdom. You're not trying to get rid of an ability to discriminate or an ability to apply and to be quite vigorous actually about what is wise. I think this passion is a slightly unfortunate translation of what is really probably what we would in more modern times call sticky attachment.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really sort of like attached to like how things need to be, and like if the world is not like this, I am not going to be happy. You know, yeah.
So would you say it's not about necessarily your emotions towards things?
No, it's more about sticky attachment, really.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Go on, Becky.
Oh, I think you just answered it, but Alexis, who joined us online, just asked you to elaborate on what dispassion is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I kind of left that in because it's quite a common translation, if not necessarily a great one. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to finish really soon. I just wanted you to get into pairs and maybe pick one thing that you think, oh, I either have like a really big reaction to that and I don't, and I want to explore it in my life, or or I quite like that and I need more of that in my life. Yeah, or you want to just explore what that might mean a little bit more. And then see if you can, both say to your partner what one of the 16 might be, and maybe how you might actually explore it in the next week.